right, everybody. Hello and welcome to another episode of Lawbogadas with your co-hosts Missy Duarte and Connie Pena. We are two lawyers, Latinas, moms on a mission to bring awareness and perspective about the issues important to you. I am Connie Pena. I am licensed in the state of Florida, practicing family law and family-based immigration, helping families and individuals transition into new phases of their lives.
And I am Missy Duarte. I am an attorney licensed in New Jersey and Florida with my office located in Hackensack, New Jersey, where I practice personal injury law. I represent victims of accidents, get compensation for their injuries, pain and suffering as a result of the negligence of another person, business, or entity.
Follow us everywhere. Our handle is Lawbogadas on all platforms. You can catch up with our latest episodes on Spotify, Instagram, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. Send us smoke signals wherever you are. You will find us. You can also send us a DM on Instagram, or you can email us at info@lawbogadas.com. So in today's episode, we are going to get into it with the amazing Missy Duarte. She is our fabulous co-host here on Lawbogadas, and we're going to talk to her today and essentially interview her about finding the right PI attorney, the right personal injury attorney. This is Missy's areas of specialization. She has a lot of experience to share with us to get you to that first decision you sadly may have to make one day after tragedy strikes, unexpectedly as it usually does. Because that first decision you're going to have to make is, which lawyer do I call, right? I got to find the right lawyer to take my case and help me out. So, Missy, getting into this, why don't you tell us about yourself and your particular practice, how long you've been practicing? Give us a little bit more of an introduction on that.
Sure. So I've been practicing now 10 years. I specialize in representing accident victims in personal injury law and have been doing that for the great majority of time that I've been licensed here. And I've just been, dedicated to fight and represent clients recover for damages. When we're talking about personal injury law, for us in law school, it's tort law. But we're talking about the kinds of cases where somebody is hurt or injured because of somebody else's negligence. And we're talking about civil litigation. It's different than civil. And this is exactly when like a party is suing another party. It's different than criminal, where, you have the government that's involved, state, local, federal, and they're prosecuting somebody. This involves a private party suing an entity or another individual. And oftentimes these kinds of lawsuits are caused, not necessarily, can be caused by crime. So the criminal aspect can come into play, but also it could be negligence or carelessness or, something less that doesn't rise to the criminal level. And there's a lot of areas, a lot of types of cases that can include or encompass personal injury law.
Okay, so a lot of people, and myself included, other than when I think about you, we think of personal injury as something like, someone got into a car accident and they're just like suing for, oh, my neck hurts. Or like a slip and fall at a grocery store. What kind of cases do you actually handle in this area?
Sure. So the range of cases can fluctuate. It can be something as simple as a motor vehicle accident, an accident involving motorcycles. It could be, car versus car. It could be motorcycle versus pedestrian. The pedestrian's involved in an accident with a vehicle. You have your premises liability cases, and people more commonly know them as slip and falls, trip and falls, fall down cases, burns. When you're talking about like at a salon, or you receive some kind of service from somebody, or perhaps there was some type of fire that caused burns to you. Also leading to the more unfortunately the bigger in terms of like the wrongful death cases, negligence, or cases that result in someone's death, whether that's a family member, a friend, or catastrophic injuries. Perhaps somebody was involved in a significant accident, and they're dealing with a lot of big injuries, a lot of fractures, and a lot of things and ailments, unfortunately, that now they have to deal with for the rest of their life.
Yeah. We have someone now who knows someone at my office who just got into a terrible wreck on his motorcycle. He's in ICU at the hospital. And he is basically his bones are shattered from the neck down.
Yeah.
He has kids, and you never know when something like this is going to happen. How many times have we been driving down the highway and we see a car that is literally flipped over like 5 times? And
Yeah.
no,
No, I was,
now what?
listen, I was driving, I was going to work last week and I witnessed an accident happen like right in front of me. So it's unfortunately, in my area of business, I always say like it's always, my clients are such nice people, and I always tell them like I wish we would have met under different circumstances. Oftentimes it's really, really tragic. It's something that it's a difficult conversation to have because it can change the trajectory of your life significantly.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult. A lot of difficult conversations are needed to be had when somebody goes through something like that.
Yeah. And like you're saying that this is a vulnerable time, like I said in our introduction, I would hope that people know who they want to call when something like this happens, because I can only imagine how much suffering is going on with the individual and the family, depending on obviously what happened. Um, and trying at that same time to figure out, oh my gosh, who do I call? Is this the kind of case that somebody can take? Are they nearby? Who should I call? And then there's people that take advantage too of people in those vulnerable situations. So let's help our listeners maybe try to figure that out, what they need to think
Sure.
about, so that because we all know somebody that something has happened to, unfortunately, and somebody that could need assistance or help. So when we talk about hiring an attorney and I guess interviewing, if you will, that attorney to hire them, what are the biggest things that initially you think people need to look at?
I mean, there's a number of considerations that you should be thinking about. I mean, look, going back to your initial point, the accident, the incident, the crash, the collision, however you want to describe it, is very significant and very stressful. My clients are working families. They are providers oftentimes. The accident in and of itself creates such a big issue. It creates a lot of havoc and a lot of stress that the family didn't otherwise have, or it adds to an already thick layer of stress and things, especially now that we live in a pandemic world, and a number of things have been affected because of it. So it is very stressful. So you're going to get, after an accident, you're going to get phone calls, you're going to receive correspondence. Specifically in New Jersey, where the great majority of my cases are, there are strict rules in terms of how communications can be had by a potential attorney. I'm not allowed to reach out to you. There's strict laws against solicitation because of where one is immediately after an accident. It's very stressful. One is vulnerable. You're getting these phone calls, and it's hard to deal with that. So the rules are in place in order to allow you that time to kind of like collect yourself, but you don't want to wait that waiting period per se to hire somebody. So there's a lot of considerations to put in play. And these are kind of the things that I like to think about, or the advice that I give people when they're looking for somebody that's maybe outside of my jurisdiction and I'm trying to help them like hire a lawyer. So like, first and foremost, do they specialize in personal injury? Now, initially, you pass the bar, we're all presumed to be competent, right? But now more and more practice areas are becoming more specialized. You can I do a little bit of other things that involve civil litigation, but primarily is the focus practice and personal injury.
Right.
Is that person dedicated to personal injury law, and how much of that practice is dedicated? It doesn't have to be 100%, but you really just want to make sure that that person is competent in this area of practice, not because, someone's uncle knows a friend who hired, fulano, or, what we say in Latino America, somebody knows somebody to hire them. Where are they licensed? You want to think about where do they participate in any bar associations? Are the things to think about that you don't think about in the beginning is their disciplinary history.
Right.
You want a lawyer with a clean track record. If you have somebody that has a disciplinary history, you might want to like reconsider or just, delve into that a little bit more. The problem is, these things, and as we're talking about them, these things are coming up in a moment where you don't have a lot of time to pick a lawyer. And the ongoing joke, if you're watching on YouTube, is that the lights in my office are time sensitive, so they always go off. So if you see me going back until we fix it, bear with me, guys. You don't have a lot of time. There's a lot of things that come into play when you first have an accident. You have the accident in and of itself. You have to set up claims. You have to document, okay, because you as the victim bears the burden of proof to present your case. You have to present the evidence, and the truth, unfortunately, my friends, is in the proof. Okay. So there's a lot of like evidence preservation that comes into play, especially how I handle the cases. Like it's very, very, very paper intensive and investigation intensive in the beginning. So you want somebody, you don't want to delve into, although you want to consider these considerations, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on them. So I want to give you some things to think about, and maybe like now, God forbid, if you ever find yourself in that situation, now is the time to kind of think about these things, about who you would hire, or, who you would look to help you hire somebody, which I do regularly. Yeah. Another thing that you want to think about is resources. Okay. But you're talking about the firm's age, size, and experience and connections and things like that. That's relevant, but I don't think that is 100% all encompassing, or, what should drive your decision to hire somebody. Okay. And I'm talking about, this is a discussion about like larger firms versus smaller firms. Larger firms, you see their advertisement, you see the billboards on the highways, you hear them advertising on radio stations. Obviously they have a larger price tag for their costs, but you also have to think about when you're talking about, these big like named firms. I'm not going to mention names, we all know them. And we all know the jingles when they come up on the commercials. Are you going to receive personal attention when you're talking about, these larger firms? Don't be so quick. Basically, the takeaway is don't be so quick to rule out smaller firms. I personally went from a mid-size to what was working up to be like a large size firm. And now I'm at a smaller boutique firm, actually developing the PI practice. So for me, that is very significant to me. I'm at a firm with 3 other partners. And what does that say to me about the confidence that my partners have in me to be able to develop a personal injury practice, an area that they didn't have before? So there is a lot of confidence from my partners who have 30 plus, 40 plus years of experience in the legal field, in the legal profession. So to have that vote of confidence, on a smaller scale is very significant. So don't rule it out. Yeah. Also with the smaller firms, like you're probably going to get more personal attention. Now, when you're talking about a case that comes into my office, you're dealing directly with me. I have staff, obviously, because I can't be in everywhere and all of the places at all times, as much as I would like to be. And I'm working on that. But until
just clone yourself, Missy. What's the problem?
Exactly. When I figure that out, it's going to be amazing. But until then, I have my staff, but you're dealing with me. You're dealing with the lawyer. So I know the dynamics that comes into play when you're talking about like the larger firms and what is happening there versus like the larger firms, the smaller firms rather. So I've taken a lot of those lessons and those things that I've seen in my experience and have kind of tweaked them and modified them to make it more of like a personal touch when you're talking about personal injury, because that's really what it is a lot, that at the end
personal.
Yeah.
It's personal.
So
let me ask you a question, Missy.
Yeah.
You were talking about specialization before, and that's something that I kind of wanted to touch on because different states have different rules about specialization and the requirements and this and that. And you're barred in New Jersey and Florida. And in Florida, for example, we have board certifications for certain areas of law. But having a board certification does not mean that the reverse is not true. That not having a board certification does not mean you're not focused in that area of practice. Right. So, right. In Florida, for example, you can be practicing family law for 30 years, nothing more than family law for 30 years, but you never bothered getting the certification, which entails essentially having a certain amount of hours of trials and cases and taking a test, right? Some people choose not to do it because for whatever reason they choose not to do it. Is the same true in New Jersey? And do you have anything that you want to add in terms of someone that, this requirement?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we do have board certifications here in New Jersey as well. There's like specifically when it comes to my area of practice, you're talking about being a board certified civil trial attorney. And then it's a very long and extensive process that one is working that one has to work towards to not only obtain but to also like maintain. So
Mhm.
I know a number of practitioners who, like you said, meet the specifications or the requirements, but for some reason, I mean, they just haven't gone through that process. So, being board certified is great, but that doesn't mean that if you're not board certified, that you are not competent in what you
Specialized
do.
or
Right.
anything.
And the inverse is true. Like, just because you're not doesn't mean that like you're not capable of handling the case and you're any less competent. That's something that I'm working towards. Unfortunately, my plan for myself was to get that all done during the pandemic, and that not during the pandemic, pre-pandemic. I was immediately before I was pregnant. So I had my whole plan was professionally come back out after maternity leave and like, hit the ground running with trials and, getting my certification because it's super uber important to me. And, we also what happened with the pandemic and what happened with the courts and now, the big shift. There's a significant number of delays. So my plan, when God says you have a plan, he laughs, right? That kind of happened to me. So here we are. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that like I'm any less. I have all the confidence in myself. And I know that my clients do and do appreciate like the level of care. So yes, that is applicable in New Jersey, as I'm sure it is in other states outside of New Jersey and Florida. But again, it's a consideration. It shouldn't necessarily be like your deciding factor. These are all things that you need to kind of consider and kind of view the whole picture to see if hiring this specific attorney, if I am a good fit for you. That's why I always kind of advertise to my clients, like you're talking to me and yes, you need your help, but you need my help. But am I going to be a good fit for you? Are you
Yeah.
going to be a good fit for me? What people don't realize is in terms of personal injury, it is very different than a number of other areas of practice. I jokingly tell my clients, like we are essentially in like a short-term marriage, if you will. It could develop into long-term because you just develop those relationships over the course of time. But these cases can take years. I have cases that I can resolve in a couple months. I have some cases I can resolve in a year and a half. Some cases go to 3-4 years plus, depending on the complexity, the issues, and things like that. So you need to be comfortable with this person that's going to be representing you. You need to be comfortable with their style. Just consider the whole picture. Don't just consider what you see online. You're going to want to meet them, whether it's virtually or in person, whatever you prefer. In terms of myself, I offer virtual consultations, in-person consultations, phone consultations. Again, I'm very sensitive to the fact that an accident has a lot of impact on one's life. So the last thing I'm trying to do is add additional stress factors to one's life. I always stress, and no pun intended there, but like my emphasis is always your job as the client is to get better. My job is to take care of the rest. The phone calls, the nonsense, the investigators showing up to people's houses, all that crap that happens, that's for me. Like you already have enough on your plate. So, that's something else that you need to think about. And come with questions. You're there to hire an attorney and you want to know about their qualifications. Ask about, have you ever handled a case like mine? What were the results? I have to be very difficult because a lot of times my results can come with conditions. So I have to be very careful as to how I discuss these outcomes. Obviously, I'm not disclosing any client names, but I have to be very careful in how I manage or explain that to somebody because I could be, in violation of some type of settlement agreement, and I don't want to do that. But I'm happy to talk about the extent of the cases that I've worked on. Has the attorney practiced or handled cases in your particular city or the county where the case happened? Ask also, who's handling your case? And we touched on this before. Who is responsible for the case? And this is going back
Who
to
do you actually get to talk to, right?
exactly
Because we all have staff, like you said, we can't do
right.
it ourselves. But I've met people who they've hired an attorney or a firm and not one spoke to the attorney, not
Yeah.
one time. And is that the kind of relationship that you want or not? Right? It's one thing to be scheduled or to talk to multiple people, and it's another thing to never speak to the attorney. If you don't
Right.
care because you trust that what's going on is appropriate, okay, great. Work for you.
Right.
But that's not the case for everyone, right?
Right. And you have to understand that, like, from what we do as practitioners, we have a number of court appearances. We have depositions to go to. We have appearances for your case. We have to call doctors and make sure, things are being properly handled. Insurance companies setting up claims. So, yeah, you want to know who's responsible for your case, but also understand that, like, your lawyer might, like, for me, I cannot talk to you every time that you call in. Like, the best way to reach me is to schedule an appointment. Like, that's how it's going to happen. And I try to do that regularly. So
And that
I'll
time is being set aside for you to be
correct.
focused on that person's call, right?
The last thing I want to do is rush a client. And this happened to me on Friday or Thursday for a Friday appointment. We were scheduling during the week. I asked my staff to reach out to a particular client and see if she was available at Friday. I don't remember, like 1 o'clock, because I had a good time block. I don't like to rush my clients. I like there to be enough time so that, you address any concerns that you have. We have a thoughtful and meaningful discussion, and we both know what's going to happen next. So this particular client wasn't available. She was available, let's say like 2:15, and I had like a 2:30 appointment. So I told my staff, I'm like, hey, just let her know I do want to speak with her. I don't want her to feel rushed. So we will address what we need to do in that, like, limited window, and we will schedule another appointment if we need to. And when we're talking about, clients and how my practice is, before getting off the call or the meeting, or we have something with the client, I kind of will outline, okay, well, this is what's going to happen. You have your appointment with Dr. Such and such. Let's follow up in about 4 weeks, to see how you're feeling, and, discuss what the next steps are in terms of your treatment plan. So you already know what's coming up and what's next. It's like, okay, I am expected to touch base with Mithy in the next 4 weeks or so. So at least that's coming up, and there's that, like, type of regular contact. I don't mean like the everyday contact, because, guys, you want somebody that's going to be working on your cases, and that's what I'm doing for you. So I want to make sure that I allocate that time to make it meaningful for you, and effective for you, so you know what's happening.
Yeah. And in terms of, the questions also to ask, what do you think about, like trial experience, not just results, but, what if this is a case that's not going to settle,
Mm,
right? And we have to go to that next step. What do you
right.
think about that? What advice do you have in terms of those kinds of questions?
Well, it's important to understand. It's important to understand, what the scope is of your representation is going to be. And a lot of that is addressed in your retainer at the outset. The way that I address it, I make my clients very clear, your cases oftentimes immediately after the accident, we're building the case. So we call that pre-suit. You enter the pre-suit stage. And I tell them from the very beginning, I work up each case. However you define it, small, catastrophic, whatever, they are all worked up the same, as if we are going to trial. That is my strategy, because if I'm not able to settle it pre-suit, then we're going to litigation, and we're filing a complaint with the court, and now we're in suit, and we're exchanging discovery with opposing counsel and doing all of these things. And we're prepared, because if we're going to suit, we can't settle before filing a complaint. We can't settle, fine. We file a complaint. Now we're exchanging discovery. The plan is always to be ready for trial, because God forbid we're not in the position to accept, or you get some type of like nonsense offer and you can't resolve the case. You can't get to the trial standpoint and say, hey, judge, I need like X amount of time to get ready for trial. The judge is going to look at you and laugh like, that, not my problem.
Right.
You had all of this time to get ready. So in terms of considerations, like, you're going to want somebody who, one, understands the process, two, is comfortable with the process. I've unfortunately known practitioners who have been practicing a number of years and they've never even been inside a courtroom.
Yeah.
I
That happens in a lot of practice areas.
Listen to me. I recently learned this, and I was completely, like, baffled, mind blown. Like, entered the courtroom, didn't even know where to stand for, they were there for a big motion hearing, like a summary judgment, which is essentially like a motion to dismiss, in litigation for our listeners. So that's a pretty significant motion, oftentimes. And the fact that you don't know where to stand in a courtroom is very significant. I am fortunate enough where very early on in law school, I knew from the beginning that I wanted to be in the courtroom. So it was very, very, very important to me to get that experience in the beginning, because I knew that if I went private, that there would be less of a likelihood for me to get that kind of experience that I wanted. So that's why I decided to be in public service, and I was a public defender for a number of years. I wanted to just get that like raw experience being in the courtroom in front of a judge, dealing with opposing counsel, and you have to kind of deal with these issues on the fly. So you definitely want somebody who is learned, if you will, and then comfortable, not only knows, but like is comfortable handling these things, and it isn't scared. That's a great question, Connie.
And at the end, I want to talk about the biggest question everyone has is, talking about money. How much is it going to cost? But before we get there, you told us you'd been practicing for 10 years. We talked about people practicing for 30 years, and that this idea sometimes that people have that they want the attorney that got barred in 1983 and, maybe doesn't even have a website, but that they've been doing this forever, right?
Yeah.
And that may be a good fit for somebody, and that might not be a good fit for another person. So, what is kind of your commentary on selecting an attorney when it comes to years of experience and, just not just the years of experience, but then also how that translates into the one-on-one or that relationship? What do you think about that?
Sure. I mean, I just immediately think about that whole, don't judge a book by its cover. The cover might be like war, and you're like, man, like this book has been through war and things like that. And the newer cover, like, I don't know about this. But the takeaway is like, don't assume that you are getting a better lawyer simply because the lawyer is of a certain age or amount of time in the profession. And this isn't a knock on anybody. Again, we're talking about consideration factors. And, I've had people that have felt that way, and that's fine. If that's what you want, then I am certainly not a good fit for you. But understand that like the age or the amount of time in the profession is not indicative of somebody's competency. I've known so many amazing lawyers with the same amount of experience that I have. There's a lot of things that you have to think about. But when you're talking about somebody, that perhaps has less amount of time in the profession, we're talking about, I don't want to make that like an ageist thing, but like, obviously I'm 37 right now. Okay. And so I've been 10 years out or so in practice. What do I know now as a 37-year-old practicing attorney that is more of an advantage than somebody who has been doing this perhaps 30 years plus? Again, not a knock. So, but there are some things that are just facts.
Right.
Better communication. Okay. We live in a very like technologically savvy world. I joke now that I feel like I'm getting to a point where I'm not as tech savvy, but I do have a lot of easier time to communicate with than some of my other partners with my clients. Whether we're talking about our case management system is amazing. I've been working with that significantly since I've been with the firm to build it, to make sure that there's certain tools in place so that the clients are able to communicate, know what's going on with their cases. They can look up their case and say, oh, okay, I have case coming up for court on such and such date, such and such time, or depositions are scheduled. Have to schedule an appointment with Missy so that we can get ready for preparation and, get her ready for debt prep or whatever it is. Another thing, clients, I might have fewer clients. If somebody has less time or certain age in the profession, they might have fewer clients, or they might have greater availability for you, is really how I want to like structure that one. Which is in turn, if they're more available to you, then that can result in better service, and they're more dedicated to you in resolving that specific issue that you need and less distracted. So that might also avoid delays in terms of litigation. I'm not saying that the attorney in and of itself is responsible for any delays, but again, it's a part of the factors or the overall picture that you want to consider. Because there's also things that come up in cases all the time. Perhaps there's new evidence that came up, a new witness comes up, or if there's some reason that causes a delay. But what I've learned, or the feedback that I've been getting from my clients, is that they love that I'm able to respond quickly. There isn't much of a delay in terms of communication with me, and then I'm available to them within reason, of course. Another thing is that you want to consider, you want somebody who is not intimidated. Okay. Now, this is like where we're talking about like the age thing that can hurt and help, right? Sometimes certain practitioners that are a little bit intimidated because they're newer to the profession, or because you have somebody who is more seasoned, again, in air quotes, on the other side, and they don't know how to deal with that. So you don't want somebody who is intimidated or unwilling to compromise simply because, opposing counsel has been in the profession longer. Like, I don't care about that. That has nothing to do with me. I'm of the position that, like, I have to zealously advocate for my clients. I don't care who's on the other side. I don't care how much experience you have. I have a job to do, and I'm going to do that job, regardless, and whatever it takes. So if you're not willing to compromise with me and we can't settle this case, then I guess we're going to trial. So I'll see you Monday.
Exactly.
And also another to consider and it goes back to the technology standpoint, is creativity. There's a lot of expertise in the field. Sometimes having somebody that perhaps, like me, I can kind of think outside of the box and think of like different creative solutions. And I like to bring into play my prior experience as a criminal defense attorney. That comes into play a lot in terms of what I do when you're talking about investigations, especially immediately after the case. And I tell my clients, like, you're going to get inundated with a lot of correspondence. I need to get this done now, out of the way, so that I'm not bothering you later. And we're talking about, filling out forms, or myself, I'm going out to the scene, especially if it's local. There's nothing more beneficial than like going straight to the scene, if you will, and like evaluating it and seeing it from a perspective of an accident or collision standpoint, and how this could all happen.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that help. And I like to do these things in the beginning, because I feel like if you wait, and a lot of, because you're like, okay, I'll work on this later, I'll build the case later. If you wait, oftentimes it is too late. And I hate to be like corny and cliche like that, but I say it all the time. It's true. If you wait, oftentimes it's too late. Evidence disappears, people disappear. You want to lock in certain things, as we learned that, you and I, in terms of criminal defense and what happens with evidence. So
where's the video?
Exactly. So I'm like, I'm getting the video, or I'm doing everything I can to get the video. And I had that come up right now with I have a pretty significant case involving a young lady that was a passenger in a car. The driver, unfortunately, was driving under the influence and had a motor vehicle accident. Single car crash, but my client has unfortunately sustained some catastrophic injuries. And immediately I'm like, okay, have to go to the scene, have to take pictures, have to send preservation to the municipality for videos and surveillance and photographs and anything else that's related or at all connected that could disappear. And you're talking about like the notes of any responding officers that could possibly help you build your case and help you establish witnesses that you might not be able to see on the initial crash report. So there are a number of things at play. And now another little like factor is like somebody like me, I have more of a social understanding about what is more hip, or like the awareness in terms of like the issues that are currently at play, and the importance of different like social scenarios and how that can come into play into cases. People aren't thinking about that in the beginning. It's interesting. Like, people are focused about the accident. I'm like, no. I need you to think about this like this. The accident is the intervening event. The accident is not the case. Oftentimes that's the big misnomer. The accident is not the case. The accident is the intervening event. And that even understates it a little bit, but it's what kind of derails everything.
Right.
If you're talking about, for example, if you're talking about somebody that's a family person, They're the breadwinner, they're the provider. Now, what is going to happen to this family as a
Job,
result of this?
kids,
Yes.
driving, going back to their job if they can work anymore and what they did.
And what happens with that? And that goes into like your area of practice and like the considerations and things that you anticipate from the beginning,
Right.
what's going to happen with all of this. So that's another thing. Social media, huge. I'm somebody who's very comfortable and I like to use social media, especially to communicate, outside of like my local window of Hackensack. There's only so much information and there's only so many people I can talk to in my time here at the office. So I think it's very, very important to have somebody that's also coming to you from an education standpoint. That is huge in my practice. And I tell my clients, I think it's very important for you to understand things, because the better you understand the process and what's going to happen or what can happen, the more of an educated decision you can make in terms of your life. Like, I'm the attorney, I'm the co-pilot. I will tell you and I will give you the advice on as to like where you need to steer the plane, but ultimately it's your decision. And you
Right.
have to understand the consequences of that.
I agree. I have that conversation with my clients too. Like, here's my advice. And some people say, Connie, I know that I could do that, but I don't want to. I just want
Right.
to, my peace is worth more. Right. And they
Correct.
just want it and they make the decisions. But as long as they're educated decisions, that's really what we care about. Right.
Right. I mean, oftentimes I've heard horror stories from people that have fired attorneys and they'll come to me because they feel more comfortable because of this. Like, you're speaking to me like you're a person, like I'm a person, like you're speaking to me at the same level. I'm not interested. I don't think I'm better than anybody. And that doesn't mean that somebody who you can't properly communicate with thinks that you're better than them. Ultimately, this is about who is your best fit. There go my lights again. You have to think about who's the best fit for you.
And
So
what Missy, with something, I'm sorry, what you just said about speaking to someone as a person, and especially in the Latino community, um, we're called doctors, right?
yeah,
People say that. And
Lawbogadas.
it's really unfortunate how sometimes it's cultural and sometimes it's socioeconomic, how people feel intimidated by speaking to their lawyer, feel that they can't communicate, feel like they don't understand, right? And it doesn't matter if you are the CEO of some Fortune 500 company that got into this catastrophic mess, or if you're, I don't know, a blue collar worker that provides also for his family, right? That has the same thing happened, right? You're both the same. You're human beings. And it's really unfortunate when people feel that way or are
Right.
treated that way, because there are attorneys that speak to people like that too. And that's just not okay in my book.
It's a big like it's a pet peeve of mine. I have a problem with that. Especially in the Latino community. I am very proud of the fact that I am bilingual and I'm able to communicate with people that speak my language, and I want them to understand and I want them to feel comfortable enough to say like I don't understand. And
Yeah.
that's a discussion for a different day in terms of our community, and oftentimes where people are not don't feel comfortable enough to say like I don't get it.
Yeah.
So if I see that, I'm gonna like, no, like you don't like, let's go back over, and it's okay. Like, I want to welcome that warm environment, that friendly environment where you feel comfortable enough to say I don't understand.
Right. And it
Because
doesn't have to be because of the language either. If you there's a reason why we went to school for as long as we did and paid as much as we did.
correct.
And the experience that we have, because if it was this simple to understand, we would be worthless.
Correct. Correct. So, I want to explain it. I want you to make sure that you are crisp clear in terms of whatever the issue is and what the potential solutions are to go about it, because ultimately it is your life.
Yeah.
So, and based all of that, you want to rate your comfort level. All based off all of that, like where does the compass steer you in terms of hiring somebody? You don't want to spend too much time. And I tell this to clients, like, I am not the kind of attorney who is trying to pressure you. I think that's in poor taste. I'm not trying to get you to pressure you to sign up with me. I'm just saying, sleep on it. And I will tell you, sleep on it. There's nothing that beats like a good night's rest. Think about it, wake up in the morning, have a clear mind. and figure out, what your strategy is. But you don't want to like wait too much because of that particular reason. There's strategy to be implemented. You have to make sure that you are on course, your case is on course, and things are preserved.
Yeah.
So
And
I
so,
mean, mhm,
no, I was going to ask, and with that $1 million question, like we're saying, is the money,
yeah.
right? I can tell you from just people that call my office, and no, I'm not trying to hide the ball or anything. I charge for a consultation. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of people sometimes call and say, "Oh, you charge," because I feel as though there's the attorneys that you mostly see advertising are personal injury attorneys. You don't
Right.
really see family lawyers on billboards and things like that, right? And you always hear like free consultation, you don't pay unless we win. And there's that idea of it. So
Sure.
can you, give kind of like a nutshell explanation as to how this affects the bottom line in terms of what the victim of, of an injury or accident is going to ultimately get, and or if they have to pay something out, do they have to pay? You're talking about pre-suit, right? Like there's not even a lawsuit filed for maybe a year. Is that money that's coming out of the client's pocket? How does all this work?
Sure. So I'll address it from how I deal with it. So personal injury cases are in New Jersey are accepted on a contingency fee basis. Contingency fee means that like something has to happen in order for something else to result, right? So the contingency is you have to recover a settlement in order for the lawyer to get paid. Okay. So then how does that work when you're talking about pre-suit? Okay. I don't accept cases unless I think I can win. Period. Point blank. I don't take everything that walks in my door. I try to think of creative solutions to come up with solutions for my clients so that they are able to get compensated if possible. But I don't take everything. You can't. So the case is once accepted and understanding the contingency fee, the clients also have the option of either paying their costs and expenses on their own out of pocket, or the firm can front the costs and expenses. And this is standard. And I know everybody that pretty much operates under this guild. So what does that mean? Costs and expenses are separate and apart from the attorney's fees. Know that from the beginning. I have the discussion that I always have with clients. So cost is anytime I have to get a check written out. It is not you and me having a discussion. It's not, the consultation is complimentary. It's not you and I having a strategy session. It's not me going out to the scene to investigate. It's not me, making phone calls and preparing the Oprah request and doing things on an hourly and keeping up with my billing and keeping this like racked. I get paid off whatever the settlement is, 1/3. Okay. Costs and expenses are separate. And then there's the attorney's fees. So the way that it works in New Jersey, let's say, for example, and this is the example I use with all new clients. Let's say, for example, they offer my client $16,000 in a case. I'm not saying that that's what the case is worth, but I'm going to show you essentially like how it is that you ultimately get your monies. So I go to the client, I say, client, they've offered you $16,000. You're like, no way, I don't want to take that. But so I can have a better understanding, how is it that I get paid on something like this? Like what happens? What do I need to worry about? Okay, fine. At this point, you haven't paid. This is a client that has opted to have the firm front the costs. They haven't paid anything. Okay. So I look on my little hypothetical and I see that the firm has paid out $1,000 in expenses. So the $1,000 comes off the top. 16 is now $15,000. After the costs and expenses are paid out, then the attorney's fee is calculated. In general, it's 33.33% or 1/3 of the settlement after costs and expenses. In general, there are a number of exceptions, which we could do another day.
Right.
So 1/3 of the 15 is 5,000. You're now left with the 10. The 10 is yours, and that's where the medical bills get paid out of. That's where like you probably have like co-pays, deductibles, any medical bill balances, and that's essentially like the number that you would take home. So that's how it would work. You're not fronting any money up front unless you want to, and I have clients that do opt for that, and that's totally fine. They keep an accounting of that. But you can do it a number of different ways. You don't have to front anything. There are different conditions that come into play where you might be responsible. for it, and that's addressed in your retainer agreement. Perhaps if you go against the, legal advice, that could trigger something in your retainer agreement where then you would be responsible for any additional costs that the firm incurs that you were not on the hook for. Because at the end of the day, it is, a strategy decision in terms of how to proceed with the case. And if the client is, if the attorney is giving you certain advice and it might not wield that certain way, you know what I mean? So there's different ways that people have worked that up in terms of the retainer and how to deal with that. I haven't had that situation arise, but more importantly, you don't have to come in thinking that you have to like pay for something. At the end of the day, this is complimentary. We want to get a good understanding of what your situation is, because again, this is a very stressful time in one's life. And the last thing you need is somebody like, hey, like you have to pay this money. You have to pay this money. Or like, hey, your case is, the undue influence and the unnecessary pressures is completely like uncalled for, especially at a moment like that, when somebody comes into my office with something significant impacting their life. So that's how I handle it. That's how, the court rules direct me to handle it. But, in terms of overall like quality and care, that's how I handle my clients in terms of the ways that the factors that I like addressed and the considerations one should have when hiring a lawyer are all of the reasons that people have opted to hire me versus somebody else. So I take a lot of like pride in that, and, review your options, to consider it, and think about it. Don't wait too long. But be comfortable in your decision.
Yeah, like you said, this ends up being like a marriage, right?
Yeah,
And because it's do I have a case? How much is it going to cost? Are you the person to take it? And if you don't trust your lawyer and you don't want to go, if you want to go against their advice, that's probably why you haven't had this issue come up, right? Because you've made all of these things so clear to the person that hires you that there's no reason for them to go against your advice, right? But if you hire someone who you don't have these conversations with, or you don't ultimately trust how they're handling your case, now it's like a divorce where we kind of divvy things up and see what we do. So this has been super helpful. Getting, a lot of people, like you said, don't just say, oh, my neighbor has a lawyer that you can call. That lawyer might be a criminal defense lawyer,
right.
And you're looking for a lawyer to do your will. Like, let's, figure out who we're hiring, how you feel with them, not
Right.
just with them as a person, but with the firm, with the way they handle their cases, with the technology that they use or don't use, and the kind of representation you want. So, Missy, can you tell everybody how to find you? You mentioned you're with partners. What's the name of the law firm? What's the website? What's the the handle on Instagram so that people can find you should they want to contact you?
Sure. So my law firm is Rem Weiss Catcher Duarte, and we're based out of Hackensack, New Jersey. We're right on Main Street. Our phone number, if you need to reach us, is 201-488-1234. That is actually our number, which is amazing. And my email is it's my name, mduarte@rwkdlaw.com. So yeah, I mean, you're free to reach out to me there. You're also, able to reach out to me directly on my personal Instagram at Missy the Lawyer on Instagram. If you have any questions, I'm always open. The big stressor in terms of what I do in my profession and the area that I practice is education. I want to be able to provide resources for people and access to those resources to be able to, make the decision that they need and feel comfortable in the decisions that they make. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Missy. Also, if you have questions for us about things that we talked about in today's episode, things that you want to comment on, things you want to hear us talk about in the future, please send us a DM, send us an email at lawbogadas.com. info@lawbogadas.com. Our handle on Instagram is @lawbogadas. And we want to hear from you. Thank you so much. Again, remember, episodes Mondays at noon with that afternoon cafecito. We are excited to continue talking to you about the issues important to you. So catch you next time.
Catch you next time. Catch that Cafecito Club on Mondays, guys. Take care. Bye.
Bye.